Hello, welcome to another episode of Brit in Poland. However, this time I'm very much in the UK, and I'm going to talk about the UK, namely the issues I see with this country, and give you a few reasons why, being completely honest, I wouldn't choose to move back here. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm up in the north, and there are a lot of lovely, wonderful people here, amazing manners, very friendly. So my issue is not so much with the people of the UK, but it is with the living conditions in this country. The cost of living is too high. I would say the government is corrupt. The media is corrupt. Law and order is also corrupt. All of these things make the UK a very unsafe place to be, in my opinion. I'm going to talk about this and more in the video, so please stay tuned. This may be upsetting for some of you. Dzień dobry, and welcome to A Brit in Poland. This channel is going to bring you everything you need to know about Poland. I am exploring the country, bringing you the history, trying to tell you about the culture, and show you what it is really like to live here. So feel free to check out my other media, Instagram, Facebook, and I will share links to those in the comments. I also have a website, www.britlivinginpoland.com, where I collate my videos for easy to view manner. Also, you are welcome to contribute to my efforts through Patronite or Patreon, and all descriptions are available below the video. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and please come back for more by subscribing, liking, or commenting. Thank you very much. Do zobaczenia. A commonly asked question I get in Poland is whether I would move back to the UK. And my answer is always, I'm not planning on it. And people are often curious why. A lot of people in Poland, they look to the UK and they see, well, what a lot of people in the world see, some kind of utopia. Some amazing place to get rich and to lead a better quality of life. Personally, I think more riches are to be found in Poland now, but it depends very much on how you live your life. So let's start this video by talking a bit about the cost of living and why I think that the UK is not the ideal place to come if you're looking for riches. So let's say the value of the money in your pocket has been going down significantly over the years. People's wages have been pretty much flat, and what those wages can buy is getting more expensive. The cost of groceries goes up every year. We are seeing a bit of inflation in Poland at the moment, but I think the inflation in the UK is much higher. The cost of housing is terrible, and we're going to go into some of the reasons why the cost of housing is so high, and why, if you're thinking of buying a property in the UK, you're going to struggle. A lot of people speak to me about, okay, I'm thinking of moving to the UK, you know, what kind of money should I have when I'm there? And I always say, well, it depends where you're living, because the UK is a very varied market. The closer you are to London, the more money you're going to need to have. I think a few years ago, if you were on, say, £40,000 a year or something like that, then, you know, that would probably be enough to get by. In London, I think you'd still struggle if you're on that kind of money. I can only really talk from my experience in Oxford, but when I was living there, I effectively had to live at home. And let's say I was on maybe about 20,000. So the idea of renting a place on my own was almost impossible. You know, over half my money, probably more like 3/4 of my money, would have gone to rent alone. And then on top of that, You know, when you think about the cost of your gas bills and your electricity, which is some of the highest in pretty much developed civilization now, it's just insane. Back in the 80s, the UK decided to privatize its industries. And what has effectively happened is these foreign multinationals have bought up UK utilities. They're not properly serviced, and we're kind of held to ransom with the costs. The watchdogs we have in place are pretty much impotent or incompetent, depends what word you want to use. But for sure, the cost of living in the UK is probably my number one reason why I wouldn't choose to live here. I honestly think you certainly don't get your value for money. But yes, let's talk about some of the other factors which I think are causing a deterioration of the quality of life in the UK. And some of the big issues I see. Some of them have even been pretty recent. So let's go to the next section. The next section, people may say, is a little bit hypocritical or perhaps just ironic. And that's because I'm going to talk about immigration. So when I grew up, you know, I grew up in Oxford, and it was a fairly multinational place to live. The family to the right of me was this lovely Indian family, and they were, you know, very friendly. Whenever they would have celebrations, they would come round, bring food. We always had a nice discussion when we saw them in the front garden. You know, it never caused us any problems at all, and were just great neighbours, to be honest. When I was in school, we had people from quite a few different countries. You know, I remember one chap from Canada, another chap from Japan. I think there were some people of, I don't know where their descent were, kind of Asian descent. So you could say, growing up, I was quite familiar with, you know, different nationalities. In our schools, we would learn about different religions. You know, there was never really any concerns. When I went to uni, again, fairly mixed group. I went to uni in Cardiff, and yeah, I had, you know, good relations with a lot of people from a lot of different countries, and so, you know, I've always had a good opportunity to speak to people from different cultures. And I quite enjoy that because I love to hear different viewpoints on the world. When I was in work, I worked a lot with India, and I would talk to them about their religion and traditions and way of life. And, you know, I'd hear all kinds of things about, say, the caste system they have there. You know, I was quite familiar with, you know, with India because when you're working in IT, a lot of the people you work with are from India. And in Warsaw, where I live now, I work with a group called Warsaw Global, and our aim is all about integration. So we help people from pretty much any country you can think of in the world who move to Warsaw, whether it be for study or work or whatever reason. But, you know, we give them activities, we help them to meet other people. You know, we enjoy learning about them and their culture. And, you know, we have a pretty safe and pretty lovely group. So, you know, when it comes to other races, other nationalities, I don't have a problem with that. You know, I think there's a lot that people can learn about each other, about each other's religions, about each other's way of life, about how different countries are run. You know, I always believe in the phrase "steal with pride." It's something I learned in one of my workplaces. And it's about getting the best you can from other people and integrating that. And that, I think, is a lot of the philosophy behind multiculturalism, and I can understand that. However, there is a difference between immigration and mass immigration. Now, obviously, I'm an immigrant now, living in Poland. I prefer the term expat, but many people say, no, you're an immigrant. I think both terms are equally as valid. Just expat sounds nicer to the ears, it sounds cooler. But the thing with the UK is it's not necessarily a case of how many people are living in the country. You know, there are countries with far bigger populations. The issue is with the speed at which people have been coming to the UK. A recent statistic that came out a few months ago is something that is turning politics upon its head, because people are never going to trust any of these ruling governments again. Because from June 2023 to June 2024, approximately 1 million people came into the UK. And those are only the ones we can count. You know, they would have come for various reasons, like all immigration. You know, many come for study, some are dependents of people, others come for work, some come for asylum. You know, there are a great many reasons why people choose to move to the UK. And a large part because we're seen as a soft touch. The benefits that we give to new arrivals in the UK, those who are claiming asylum, are incredibly generous. In fact, we're going to be spending, well, an insane amount every year. What are we talking, 20, 50, 100 billion to deal with the influx of immigrants that come into the country. This is money which our government says we don't have, yet they seem quite willing to spend it and not to take any measures to address the situation. We have a number of issues in regards to, let's say, the small boat crossings. Now, this is, you could say, a fraction of the total immigration that we get into the country. But nonetheless, it is still a significant concern, mainly because the people who come over on the small boats, primarily young lads in their 20s, well, we have no idea who they are or where they've come from. There's a habit where pretty much they will throw their passports overboard as soon as they get on these boats, and when they land on UK shores, not all of them are picked up by the police. Those that are picked up are taken to hotels and basically given pretty much 4-star accommodation, a mobile phone, cash in their pocket, SIM cards, other stuff. Of course, they're fed, you know, so they're pretty much treated like royalty, you could say, until the government eventually finds some housing for them. And the funny thing is, we don't really have any housing. Because of the massive increase in population, it's said that we have to build something like, what is it, like 3 million homes a year, or something crazy, to keep up with the numbers that are moving here. And, well, let's be honest, that's not possible. The latest government are committing to build 1.5 million homes over their span of parliament. Nobody thinks it's possible. Whether they'll do this or not remains to be seen. But we're going to talk about the government a bit later. Of course, the UK, we have a lot of issues with security and safety. And of course, not all of this is driven by immigration, and it's certainly not correct to say that every immigrant is going to cause a problem in the UK. However, it's hard to say exactly what the situation is because the government refuses to release the statistics on offenders. It's a big problem and something which seems to be only getting worse. You look at the situation in London, where you have moped gangs driving around, stealing people's phones right out of their hands, attacking them for watches. Even high-profile celebrities have been targeted by these people. You have a significant amount of knife crime. You have a significant number of shootings in a country where weapons are not legal. It's absolutely insane. We're going to talk next about justice in the UK and what we're seeing there, which is something that's equally is shocking to me. So one very shocking, let's say, set of crimes, which I didn't mention, were the grooming gangs. Now, I'm hoping most people would be familiar with this story, but in case you're not, effectively, throughout the UK, we have networks of men who are grooming young girls typically around the age of 13 or so, maybe a bit older, maybe a bit younger, depending on the case. They ply them with drugs, alcohol, sweets, whatever. They often find them from broken homes, living in sheltered accommodation, and promise them a better life. These women are then repeatedly raped, and it's absolutely horrific. Now, this is something which I hate to say, but is primarily an immigrant issue. And it is something that the government and the police ignored for 10, 20 years before they actually did something about it. We're starting to see prosecutions now, but the countless thousands of people whose lives have been destroyed by this is absolutely shocking. Now, I said I was going to talk about law and justice in this section, and this is something which is becoming chilling for me. So in the UK, it depends what you believe, but I've personally seen enough examples of it for me to be convinced. There are some that say it's a far-right conspiracy. That's what the media would have you believe, what the police would have you believe. And the fact that they try to deny this when it's so plain in your face just amounts to gaslighting. But we have something called two-tier justice in the UK. And effectively, what that amounts to is if you are, let's say, on the right-hand side of politics, even a bit towards the centre, if you're someone that doesn't agree with the current methodology of immigration, with trans rights, with, well, anything that questions the direction this country is going, it's quite easy for you to find yourself in jail. You could write something on, say, X, Twitter, something on Facebook, and many people have been jailed simply for that. Of course, the police will say that these people are inciting hate. However, there's no evidence that the posts that they put up, and often very quickly deleted, actually caused any incident. We had something called the Southport riots, and this was something that happened a few months ago in response to an absolutely insane and evil person, at least supposedly. We have to be very careful what we say about this issue, who murdered small children at a Taylor Swift dance class and heavily injured their teachers as well. Something which nobody should ever have to even imagine, let alone face on their TV screens. And afterwards, there were some riots which were not pretty. There were some people who went out, they were marching in the streets. Some, let's say, properties such as mosques and asylum hotels were, well, they weren't actually set alight, but people were trying. There was stuff thrown at the police. It was pretty pretty ugly. And the people who took part in these things, well, they were very quickly marched to prison. Their trials were sped up in an insane fashion with overnight courts in the speed of justice you will never see anywhere else in the justice system. Even people who just tweeted speculation about the killer also found themselves in jail. People who were watching these riots from the sidelines have also found themselves in jail. It's been a complete attack on anyone who is supporting what happened. Whereas on the other side of the coin, you have people marching in London, people who are chanting death to Israel, people who are praising Hezbollah, Hamas, which are prescribed terrorist groups, people who are calling for the death of anyone on the right of politics. And yet these people, well, let's be honest, you never see them arrested. The police are standing there. When anyone challenges these people, it's the people that challenge that are more likely to get in trouble than the people who are causing harm. There was one case I saw where a band of gypsies were burning a bus and having a bit of a riot in some village or something. And one of the local residents, who was a pillar of the community, went out to challenge these people, to ask them to calm down. And she was the one that got in trouble with the police. It's absolutely insane. You have a situation where thousands of criminals have been released from prison early. You know, many of them sex offenders, some of them have even committed murder, all in the name of freeing up space to put the other rioters in check. It's absolutely insane. You have convicted paedophiles, people like Hugh Edwards, for example, a prominent BBC reporter, who are free to walk the streets, despite having images of children which are just nobody should have. Even the person who was convicted of supplying him with these images went off completely scot-free. There is no protection for our children in this country. And while we're on the topic of the media, let's talk about that next. So, if you live in the UK or you're abroad, pretty much everyone will have heard of the BBC. You know, this is a very long-standing, British broadcasting corporation. And many would say that they are reliable. Many would say that they are impartial. At least they're supposed to be. However, unfortunately, you cannot believe everything you see on the BBC. And it's the same with other outlets such as Sky News, ITV, Channel 4. These channels have an agenda. What I've done in order to learn the truth is to turn to alternative media outlets. There are new channels that have popped up, such as Talk TV, GB News, and I also frequent some independent journalists, such as Maya Tuzi. Yeah, there are a few out there. If you want more of a list of people, I can put that in the comments. But what you find with the, let's say, mainstream media is they have, as well as the police, and you'd say the government, been captured by this woke ideology that has infiltrated America. And from the many hours of research I've done into this subject, watching many videos trying to understand what on earth is going on, it seems to be a hangover from brainwashing done by the Soviet Union. And it's a form of Marxism that has gripped these people. You could say much of the West is very much brainwashed right now. So what you find is the mainstream media gives a very, very left-wing, like far left view in many cases. They attack anything on the right. People are labeled as far right, people are labeled as racist, people are labeled as Hitler, even though he was a far left socialist. Simply for expressing a counter view to what you see, well, what comes from the government, effectively. We're very much prisoners in our own country. And one thing that's massively on the rise, and I would say, largely in part due to the mainstream media, is anti-Semitism is probably one of the highest levels it's ever been in the UK. They say that history repeats. However, I never wanted to see Nazi Germany return. I never wanted to see communism return. But this is what we're facing now. And it doesn't end there. We're next going to talk about our government and what they've been doing, and how perhaps we have one of the worst governments in UK history right now. Something I never expected to see. So after 14 years of Tory rule, the public said enough. They could see a government that was not addressing their concerns, that was not running the country in a way that they felt it should be run. People decided that they needed a change. And in the UK electoral system, this basically meant that the Labour government was elected. When only about 20% of the country turned out in the last election, you can see a very strong apathy developing in this country when it comes to UK politics. And the sad thing is that apathy has allowed something quite terrible to happen. So the UK government is run by Keir Starmer, and since they came into power, they have managed to become perhaps the most unpopular government in UK history. One of their first actions was to remove something called the winter fuel allowance from pensioners, something that many people were dependent on to pay their heating bills in the cold winter months. This, of course, has provoked nationwide anger. Another thing that has been done is inheritance tax is being imposed on farmers who were previously exempt, because any right-thinking person will know farmers, they may have a lot of land, they may have a lot of money tied up in assets like tractors and farm equipment, but they don't make a lot of money. In fact, farmers are having a harder and harder time every year as their primary customer are the supermarkets, who are squeezing the very life out of them. So what this means is when sadly, a farmer will decide to pass on his inheritance, or, will pass away, it could mean a lot of farms end up being sold off, certainly downsized, because the cost of the tax will be more than they can bear. And in a country that is now left the European Union, that should be as independent as possible, the idea of attacking farmers is simply absurd. Now, let's talk about some of the other fun things that the government has been doing. Now, this government is probably not the only one certainly not the only one guilty, but there have been a lot of, let's say, freebies given by wealthy donors in particular to the Prime Minister. In fact, one of these donors was even temporarily allowed access to the Chambers of Parliament, which was completely against parliamentary rule. This has now been revoked. It's quite shocking, some of the levels of kind of bloated hypocrisy we're seeing. Policies that the Conservatives were very unpopular for, and the government would criticise, the opposite government would criticise them for, are being continued and touted. Public spending has improved. I can say that people working in hospitals and such are now better off. However, there's been no attempts to reform these institutions, where you could say there is a lot of waste and inefficiency, which is driving up the cost, as well, of course, as an aging population and a large number of immigrants coming in and using the system. It's apparently something like 13% of the country is on an NHS waiting list right now. And social housing, well, you can forget about it. If you're homeless, you're not going to get any help from the government. And I think increasing numbers of people are being made homeless every year. One of the government's key commitments, which has most of the British public up in arms, is a commitment to net zero. And this is meaning that we are having a lot more wind farms and solar plants built, which in an ideal world would be wonderful, clean energy. However, these resources are not fit to completely manage the UK energy concern. And you have to wonder if there are some vested interests on the part of the government, perhaps shareholdings, for example, which could be driving this. What they're doing has been declared as pretty much insane, because it's putting businesses out of work with the carbon taxes, and there are all kinds of taxes. I don't know the full details, but the cost to industry is so severe that many plants and manufacturing are choosing to leave the UK because it's simply not profitable to run a factory here anymore. And this government is also, responsible for all the people who are currently sat in a jail cell for saying something that the government didn't like. You would argue that we actually have political prisoners in the UK now. Something completely insane in my book. You have a Chancellor of the Exchequer, so the person in charge of the economy, who it would appear lied about her experience to get into the job. No action has been taken. You have people that are, condemning Donald Trump, cozying up to the European Union. And that depends on your politics and what you think is the right way to go. But, well, let's be honest, let's look at Germany, let's look at the Eurozone, and let's compare that with America, and let's see who is more prosperous and who would be a better trading partner and ally for the UK. A lot of people are saying that the UK is now very much a socialist, some would even go as far as saying communist country. The police are being compared to the Stasi. You have to be very, very careful what you say on social media now, because it's quite likely that if you say the wrong thing, you will have somebody knock at your door. You may just get a warning. You may get a non-crime hate incident, but effectively you have something of a record which you really shouldn't have in a place that should be full of free speech. In fact, when I publish this video, I'm going to do very much from Poland, just to be safe. So these are a lot of the reasons why I'm very concerned about what is going on in the UK. One of my favourite books is 1984. I never expected it to come true. People have been talking about Big Brother for a long time, but now it seems that our politicians are taking all of the lessons from that book and choosing to implement them one by one. So, thank you very much for watching. I know this has been a very grim assessment of what is going on in the UK, and there are for sure a lot of people who are probably going to say some rather mean things on this video. I'm beyond caring at this point. I love my country, and it makes me very sad to see the state that it is in now. Thank you very much for watching. Do zobaczenia.